A single mother is arrested and held in jail overnight for driving with a suspended license that she couldn't afford to renew. A prisoner with mental illness is languishing in solitary confinement. A young man who paid his debt for a drug offense and wants to start fresh can't find a job or housing on account of his criminal record. Are we missing the mark in our pursuit for justice in America? America locks up more of its citizens than any other nation. 2.7 million children have an incarcerated parent. That is 1 in 28 children in the United States. The impact is highest among African American children, where 1 in 9 have a parent incarcerated, and an estimated 1 in 3 Americans has a criminal record. Overall crime and arrest rates are down from the early 1990s, but states are giving sentences at a rate 165% harsher than they were for the same crimes in the 90s. Prosecutors now seek felony charges after an arrest much more frequently than they did even a decade ago. Data shows that these policies aren't making us safer. Less than 25% of the decline in crime can be attributed to incarceration. Our God is a just God. Throughout Scripture, we find principles that should guide our response to crime and incarceration. As followers of Christ, we are called to be a witness for the poor and the vulnerable to pursue justice. If we are all created in the image of God, then we must seek a justice system that is fair and redemptive for all. In a new Barna poll commissioned by Prison Fellowship, 86% of Christians shared that they would believe the main goal of the justice system should be restoration for all involved: the victim, the community, and the person responsible. Practicing Christians are more likely to believe caring about prisoners is important on account of their values. However, when asked if it was acceptable for someone to be punished more than their crime deserved in order to make a statement, 51% of Christians agreed. We aren't consistently applying our values. We know we should bring the hope of the gospel to prisoners, but we are dismissive of our duty to see biblical values lived out in our justice system. No group is better positioned than the church to advocate for justice. Will you put your faith into action?
Hi, Vanguard University. My name is Heather Rice-Minus, and I work for Prison Fellowship as the Senior Vice President of Advocacy and Church Mobilization. I'm delighted to be with you for Real Talk Fridays, and thank you to Reverend Whitford for the invitation. And I just want to share with you my screen here and talk you through a really important topic of justice. And I'm delighted that you all are thinking about this and how we as Christians can apply justice in our criminal justice system here in America. So at Prison Fellowship, we are the nation's largest Christian nonprofit serving those who are impacted by crime and incarceration. And we believe our mission is to restore those affected by crime and incarceration. And our vision is to see those affected by crime reconciled to God, their families, and their communities. We actually believe that this is a calling of the church. Our mission is a calling of the church. The church is uniquely called to restore those impacted by crime and incarceration. And so that can include us as an organization, but also us as individuals. Me and those of you listening can be part of restoring those who are impacted by crime and incarceration. Just a brief overview of Prison Fellowship's impact. We have 120 academies. We actually have a lot in California. That's our flagship program where we walk men or women who are incarcerated through a very holistic program where they learn about life skills and go through a lot of things to uncover what brought them to prison and to restore them to their families and communities. And so we have those across the country in select prisons. That's not possible without our thousands of prison fellowship volunteers who go into prisons. We also serve children of the incarcerated, and last year in 2019, we served over 300,000 who have children who have an incarcerated parent through Angel Tree Christmas, which provides a Christmas gift on behalf of their mom or dad with a message from their mom or dad, and also an offer for a children's Bible. We have a program for wardens where we train them on how do you promote moral rehabilitation in your prison. And finally, we have our advocacy work. Here you can see in the bottom row some of the impact there. We have a small group curriculum called Outrageous Justice we'll talk a little bit more about later. We have advocates who make our work in advocacy possible, justice ambassadors, and then we also have a lot of partners who join with us in celebrating second chances. And so just to frame the conversation today, I want to talk about over-incarceration in America and just give you a picture of the scope of the problem. It's a big problem here. In fact, we have 4% of the world's population, but 21% of the world's prison population. And so per capita, America is leading in incarceration, and I don't think that's a statistic we should be proud of. That comes with 2.2 million people who are incarcerated, and every year 600,000 of those folks return to our communities and they become our neighbors again. Unfortunately, 2 out of 3 of those people returning to our communities will reoffend. Sometimes that means they may commit a new crime. A lot of people also go back to prison for a technical violation, not showing up to a meeting with your parole officer, for example. Also want to talk about the scope and the broader impact than just those numbers. There's 1 in 28 children that has a parent who is in prison. There's 1 in 9 when we look at African American children. And the problem doesn't just contain those who are in prison. There's also this lifelong effect and barriers that are placed on people because they have a criminal record, even after they have paid their debt. There's actually an estimated 70 million, or 1 in 3 American adults, have a criminal record. And I want to also point out that there's 4.5 million people on probation or parole, in addition to those who are serving time in our jails or prisons. Right now in our country, you're probably hearing and thinking a lot about racial justice. And the criminal justice system is a key point where we see that there is a lot of disparity and injustice happening. We know that Black Americans make up only 13% of the United States population, but they make up 27% of arrests, 33% of those who are incarcerated, and 38% of parolees. So just great disparity there. And we also know that communities of color and their experience with police looks different than it does with white Americans. They're subject to higher than average rates of traffic stops, searches, and threats or use of violence. Another problem related to this criminal justice system issue is inadequate engagement by the church. So we know this is a big problem in our country. We know that it disproportionately affects communities of color. And another related problem is, what is the church doing about it? Are we talking about it? And as you can see from this polling here, we asked practicing Christians across the country, is your church engaged in raising awareness among its congregants about any of the following issues? And glad to see that they're talking about a lot of these other things, but you can see criminal justice out of the options listed was the least likely to be selected. And so we know we have a problem as the church in America about giving sufficient attention to this issue. And you can also see race issues and relations is not too much ahead of that. And so we need to be doing more to talk more about this. And so I'm glad you're tuning in today. And I just want to talk briefly about knowing the scope of the problem, why we at Prison Fellowship believe that over-incarceration has really failed us, and that there is another way. So I like to ask people if they think the crime rate is up. When we do our new employee orientation at Prison Fellowship, I find that often People think it is up. Maybe you've turned on the weekly news or heard on the radio the latest crime that's happened near you. And so oftentimes it can feel like the crime rate is up. But in fact, overall, crime has really significantly declined, as you can see in this chart. If we go back to the 1980s, when we were at a really high point, there may be times when there are influxes in particular cities, but on the whole, as a country, we've seen a significant reduction in crime. And there's many factors that explain why. During that time period, we started incarcerating a lot more people. And so some might say, well, crime was up, we incarcerated a lot more people, and now crime is down. But in fact, incarceration is really linked to no more than 25% of the reason that our crime rate has gone down. Meanwhile, we've seen a growing economy, drug market changes, the aging baby boomer population, strategic policing solutions, community responses to crime. All of these things have played a role. And so while incarceration has skyrocketed in America, we've been benefiting from lower crime rates. We don't need all of that incarceration, and it really has this incredibly harmful effect on communities and families, and of course those individuals who are behind bars from longer than they need to be, or who don't need to be there at all. And so this is something we really grapple with at Prison Fellowship and try to get Christians more aware of, so that we can be part of the solution. Another misnomer I want to put out there is I think there's a lot of fear around thinking about people who perhaps have been in prison or have a criminal record. And what we know from the data is actually that redemption is real. And so we see that if people get out of prison over time, depending on your age and the type of crime you committed, we actually see that the longer you stay out without committing a new crime, your rate or likelihood of committing a new crime keeps going down, and you don't remain at a high risk just because you've done this before. If you've been out, your risk will go down to that of someone else in the general public who has never committed a crime before. That's called the point of risk convergence. And so we really need to, as Christians, embrace the fact that redemption is real, that people really can transform and be redeemed, and we actually know that this is true from the data. And so I want to talk a little bit at Prison Fellowship about how we navigate this big problem we have in the country. What solutions do we have to offer? And as Prison Fellowship, we have a very holistic menu of things that we do through our programs. We train people to go into prison and to minister those in prison. We equip corrections leaders to make their prisons more rehabilitative. Through our Angel Tree program I mentioned, we care for families of the incarcerated. And then we advocate. We advocate for a more restorative justice system so that fewer people are sent to prison. Those who do need to be in prison have transformative opportunities, and that people really get a second chance when they return and have paid their debt. And so I want to talk about our approach to that last piece of advocacy. Our approach is a restorative one, and we believe that that is the theme throughout Scripture that we see of God wanting to restore those who have harmed others. So we want to advocate for a justice system that recognizes and advances the dignity and value of human life. We want to prioritize victim participation in that process. A lot of times our traditional legal system or criminal justice system doesn't allow for outcomes that really lead to healing for victims. And so we want to prioritize their participation. We want to cultivate the community to be part of that process as well, because crime doesn't just harm the direct victim, it's also tearing the fabric of society. And so we want the community to be engaged. And finally, our work with those who are responsible for crime, what we're trying to do is, one, promote proportional punishment. We see that we have really excessive sentences in this country. We're giving sentences that are much longer for the same crime today than we were just a few decades back. And we know that that actually has diminishing returns. We also want to promote a constructive prison culture, a constructive corrections culture. If we are requiring you to lose your liberty because of what you've done, we're going to put you in prison or on probation or parole, we want there to be opportunities for you to transform, to get the tools you need to make a change in your life. And so we work on things like conditions of confinement and opportunities for programming to make sure that that's the case for you. And finally, we want closure. We want people who have paid their debt and done what a judge has asked of them. Once they've done that, we want them to be able to come home and truly have a second chance. And so just a little more detail of the policies that we are focused on, both at the federal level with Congress and the administration, as well as in certain states. We have state level reforms. And so we're focusing on those 3 areas I mentioned. And you can see some of the sub issues within that include things like policing reform, sentencing reform, trying to promote alternatives to incarceration, which includes things like drug courts or mental health courts. We want the conditions of confinement to be humane and reflect human dignity. And so we've often spoken out on the use of solitary confinement in prison, for example. We want to expand prison education and programming. One of the key initiatives we have right now at the federal level has been to bring about Pell Grants, give access to Pell Grants to incarcerated students. In 1994, a big bill, the crime bill, was passed, which led to the building of lots of prisons, far longer sentences across the country. And another thing that bill did was it banned incarcerated students from accessing Pell Grants. You or someone you know may have a Pell Grant to be at Vanguard right now, and people normally access that because of because they have a low income. And so you get awarded that. And in 1994, incarcerated students went from being able to access those grants to not being able to. And we saw a dramatic reduction in the number of programs offered in prisons for incarcerated students to get a degree and really start transforming their life while in prison. Luckily, there's been executive action to create some pilot programs under both President Obama and continued under President Trump. But Congress needs to pass a law to make all incarcerated students eligible again. And the way that this works would not mean that students who haven't committed a crime would not get access. If you qualify, you'll get access to Pell Grants just based on income. And so that's something we're really pushing for at the federal level. In this bucket of second chances, we certainly are doing a lot in terms of occupational licensing, making sure that people, there aren't restrictions against people with a criminal record from getting a job in particular fields. For example, we know there have been states where they will actually teach people who are incarcerated how to become a barber, but then when they get out, they are barred because of their criminal record from actually practicing as a barber. So we try and remove or at least limit some of those barriers. We also try and restore voting rights. And a lot of states have made a move to restore voting rights for those who have completed their punishment. And we also want to repeal existing what we call collateral consequences of a criminal conviction. So a lot of times we'll hear someone get sentenced, they'll know they'll have to serve that time, but what they weren't expecting was all these additional barriers that they're going to have to face, whether that's just general stigma, or not being able to access certain jobs or housing or education. And in California, just most recently, some of you may have been following that Governor Newsom just signed a law that will allow formerly incarcerated people who want to serve as firefighters to get access to that role because they were actually trained and serving as firefighters while they were incarcerated. And so we train people in California to do that. They've been helping with the fires that have been happening there. But once they get out, because of their criminal record, they're now barred from becoming a firefighter and getting paid at the full rate of a firefighter. And so Governor Newsom just signed a law that will take some meaningful steps towards alleviating that problem. And so that's a great victory there. So that's just some examples of the policies that we're seeking. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a moment and invite my friend and colleague, Sammy Perez, to join us. And Sammy has been with us for a few years now. Welcome, Sammy. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Doing good. So it's good to be here with Vanguard University today. And I wanted you to hop on. And, I've been going over a lot of the statistics, the scope of the problem, but I think it's really important for people to understand that this affects real people. If you out there listening aren't someone who's been personally affected or have someone in your family, they're probably there and you don't know it just based on the statistics. But I wanted Sammy to come on and first, for starters, maybe share a little bit about your story and journey and how you came to Prison Fellowship.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this time. It's a privilege. Life growing up for me was honestly, it was really challenging. I actually grew up in a single parent family home. My father was an alcoholic and he was abusive towards my mother, and ended up leaving my family when I was only 2 years old. As a result of that sort of disruption and several other factors, I began to really just take to the streets. I didn't have any positive male role models who I could look up to and who could help guide and lead me as I began to grow into a young boy and eventually a young man. So I ended up actually, unfortunately, having my first sort of encounter with law enforcement around the age of 8. That cycle sort of continued. As a teenager, I ended up being arrested and serving time in the youth prison down in Virginia. And it was actually only 6 months after I was released from incarceration as a youth that I found myself arrested again, this time as an adult. So ended up in 2005 actually being sentenced to 11 and a half years in prison. Thankfully, only ended up serving about 7 years. One of the good things I would say that came out of that experience was that was really where I found my faith. That was where I found the Lord. I was very broken and really desperate, but the Lord came and He met me there. I was released back in 2011 with, a new faith and newfound hope, and really just started to rebuild my life. One of the biggest desires that I had was just, I wanted to give back. I wanted to be able to help, men who were in similar situations as I was, and even women as well. Ended up finding Prison Fellowship and started to volunteer as a justice ambassador, and, shared my story. Even wrote a few letters to the editor about some key issues that Prison Fellowship was working on. Really just continued to build that relationship there. And I had a close friend of mine who actually recommended that I consider applying for a job at Prison Fellowship. And at that point, I wasn't really even looking for a job, but I figured, hey, what would it hurt? And ended up applying and, was hired by Prison Fellowship. And now I have the opportunity to run the same program that I was volunteering for. So it's just, it's been a tremendous journey, and I thank the Lord for all of His blessings. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Sammy. So amazing to have you as a leader on our team, and just to see your story come full circle. We were talking a little while ago about how redemption is real, and the data proves it. Not only you, but so many of our justice ambassadors have a story or have a loved one who have had a transformative journey. And so I think it's great for people to see those stories. And I think stories can be a powerful part of advocating. And Absolutely. So what I'd love to do now is just transition a little bit. We went over a lot of stats and policies, and I think it's great for people to hear a real life story, but I'd also love to just chat with you about some of the ways perhaps Vanguard students might consider getting engaged on this. And so I'm going to share my screen here, Sammy. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So one of the first things I thought we could talk about, Sammy, is changing your language. And this is something we're passionate about at Prison Fellowship, because we really believe that labels can be powerful in a positive way or in a negative way, and can often take away from our identity in Christ. And so would you just maybe talk a little bit about why you see this as important in the context of criminal justice? And if people are thinking, well, I don't know how to replace words that these labels that are up here, felon, convict, what might they do instead?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the language we use is so important, right? Scripture tells us that the power of life and death is in the tongue. And, we literally have the opportunity to speak life into the people that we encounter on a daily basis, or also speak the opposite, speak death or destruction. So, in the context of criminal justice reform and, really just thinking through some of the labels that a lot of men and women, have to or are placed on these folks, it really just exacerbates an already difficult journey. As men and women are reentering society, trying to build their lives, trying to gain the public's trust back, and just to reestablish themselves. It's such a really, I don't. The word is even hard to describe. It's really discouraging. It doesn't fully describe it. To have a label, to be called, something like a felon, or an ex-offender, or many of the labels that that folks experience. So, I believe that it truly just perpetuates the cycle of incarceration, and it limits people's ability to really reach their full potential. I can give a very short example of my life. I'm recently graduated with a master's degree in professional counseling. And typically the next step for a master's student, once they've graduated, is to begin pursuing licensure. But I faced many hurdles in that process. And even I can recall there was at one point I was trying to collect court documents because I was going through a sort of a process from the Board of Ethics for a national certification for counseling. And the lady very straightforward reminded me that I was a felon. And I remember those words just hitting me like a ton of bricks. And, it's been really a very big part of my journey. And even, to this day, like I'm hesitant to continue to establish myself in that career field because I know the challenges. So it has very real impacts on a very real impact on the lives of many men and women when we're not careful to consider the language that we use. So, at Prison Fellowship, we believe that, advocating for language that reflects human dignity and value is extremely important. And helping people, even if it's just being aware of the language that we're using and how we're referring to them. And I would say that, if folks are looking for ways to learn more about how to do this, you can actually check out our website. We actually have a blog that's titled "Hello, My Name is Felon." So you can search that on our website, and you can actually learn learn more about this issue, and also just how you can continue to develop language that really reflects the human dignity and value of people.
Right. And I think so often, like, we feel like we have to use those terms to give context. And it's like, you can say people or Sammy, who once was, and really make sure we're emphasizing the person's identity as a person, as a child of God, right? That felon is not a permanent label, right? We are transformed. And so when we use that in such a permanent way, this woman's referencing something back from so long ago, right? And that's not core to who God sees you or who we should see each other as Christians, right? To see others. So appreciate you sharing that, Sammy. Also, just a couple of resources I want to go through, and then I'd love to give Sammy a chance to talk a little bit about the program he runs now. Real quick, Outrageous Justice, small group curriculum I mentioned earlier. We have 6 lessons that we go through. It has a video and a study guide, and we also have a companion book that goes with it that you can read along with it. You can actually order this, and we will ship it to you and give it to you entirely for free. There's a digital version. There's a hard copy version that we can mail to you. You go to prisonfellowship.org/outrageousjustice to get that, and that would be a great way for you among your colleagues there at Vanguard or in your community or in your church to continue this conversation. And Sammy's team's actually been leading some online groups. So if you don't have a group to join to talk about it, we'd love to have you join with us. And so encourage you to come to the website, order it, let us know if you're interested in signing up for a group. I also want to flag, I know it's only fall, but April is coming, and April is Second Chance Month. Prison Fellowship has actually spearheaded an effort to celebrate April as Second Chance Month for several years now. And we provide a number of things we can do to raise awareness about the barriers and the stigma that Sammy was just talking about on our website, prisonfellowship.org/secondchances. There's a social media toolkit. There's a toolkit for churches to host a Second Chance Sunday. There's a toolkit to host a prayer walk where you lift up stories like that of Sammy's, of people who have really transformed and offer prayer. So lots of ways to get involved during April, and encourage you to check that out. And now with that, Sammy, I want to talk to you just a little bit. You oversee our whole grassroots program. So grassroots meaning everyday people, Christians who want to get involved in our work and advocate. One of the key ways they can do this, right, is through our Justice Action Center. Could you tell them what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So our Justice Action Center actually is a space on our website where we actually house all of the active campaigns that we have going on. So at Prison Fellowship, we advocate for a variety of different issues, as you can see on the screen here. So one of the campaigns that we have is restoring Pell Grants for incarcerated men and women. So there's a number of different sort of areas where we advocate for. And at the Justice Action Center, you can actually find live campaigns where anyone can go online. They can actually access the campaign, read just to learn a little bit more about the issue, and then they can contact or reach out to their lawmaker and send them a letter and ask them to support a lot of these very important legislations and bills that Prison Fellowship's advocating for.
And that take a long time. These are busy college students.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it doesn't take a long time at all. I mean, it's literally within a couple of minutes. You could send a pre-drafted letter. You can definitely personalize it and make it your own. But it takes maybe 1 to 2 minutes to complete an action, and every single action is definitely worthwhile and it counts. It's a very easy way just to get involved in this space and to make your voice heard.
Thanks, Sammy. And I mean, really urgent needs. I mean, we talked a little bit earlier, I was sharing about our efforts on Pell Grants, and I also see the COVID-19 support one, which is really just to encourage lawmakers to think about folks who really don't need to be in prison, because COVID spreads, especially right now, we need to think about that. COVID-19 spreads so quickly, especially in places like prison where people can't socially distance. And we don't want prison to be a death sentence, which it has been for, unfortunately, more than 1,000 people already in this country in our prisons. So definitely, as Sammy said, check out prisonfellowship.org/action center. Takes just a minute for you to engage with your public officials. And last but not least, Sammy, tell us what the Justice Ambassador Program is. These are not just folks who are taking a minute, right? This is a little bit more intense.
Yeah, just a little bit more. So our Justice Ambassador Program it consists of everyday Christians who are just passionate about criminal justice reform. They're passionate about raising awareness and really influencing people within their communities, within their churches, and then specifically influencing their lawmakers. So we have 240 justice ambassadors around the nation who work to support the advocacy work that Prison Fellowship is involved in. So once again, advocating for those different issues, our ambassadors they host events within their communities and within their churches. They even share about different action opportunities. They focus on developing and having one-on-one meetings with their lawmakers to influence them to take on or to really advocate for restorative practices and really biblical values. I think that, as Christians, we believe that, we're called to be in the public space, and we want to raise our voice. We want for our lawmakers to consider taking a biblical approach when it comes to justice. So if you feel like you're called, or if the things that you heard on this call, they really ignite your passion, we'd love to have a conversation with you to see if the Justice Ambassador Program is a good fit. You could actually learn more on our website at prisonfellowship.org/Justice Ambassador. So it's a terrific program, and it's just a great way to take your advocacy to the next step.
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad you became a Justice Ambassador one day long ago, Sammy, and now you're leading that whole program. Sammy's amazing. So if you're interested, you should definitely apply. Like Sammy said, it's on our website. You can go prisonfellowship.org/Justice Ambassador, or just click on volunteer, and the option will also be there for you. I want to thank you, Sammy, for joining me, and I want to thank all of you for listening. I hope that you learned something today, and that you think about one small way you can put your faith into action on this issue. So thank you, and God bless.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.